Catherine Zaleski.
All right, hello. I love that announcer's voice. It was like very booming. I feel like I'm in, like an R-rated movie or something, but which I don't think we can bring you with this panel, but we're going to be very interesting here. So I have Brandy Miguel with me, who's the president of the City Foundation, and then Robin Scott, who's the co-founder and CEO of Apolitical. And we're going to talk today about fostering innovations in cities, which is obviously the big theme of this conference. But I'm going to start out with the very obvious question is, why are inclusive cities so important? And how are cities across the globe really connected on this very issue? So I know, Robin, with your work with Apolitical, which is a peer-to-peer platform where people share ideas on improving cities, you really talk about the commonalities between cities that are actually more common between cities than with countries. So like Beijing and New York probably have more in common than New York State and Alabama, for example. So on the innovation front.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, inclusive cities are happier cities, healthier cities, economically healthier cities. And with more and more people moving to cities, the imperative around inclusion is only growing, and the costs of neglecting it are growing, whether that be populism or violence or economic decline. And there's so many ways in which cities are sharing. If you take making cities work better for women and including women in the workforce, the area you work in, Catherine. Yes. Mexico City is doing amazing things around transport and making the transport system better. You've got Toronto adding request stops at night so women are safer walking back home. Right. For example, on children, you've got Ghent in Belgium trying to become the most child-friendly city in the world. India, in Bhubaneswar, has managed to involve 35,000 children in designing neighborhoods that are more child-friendly, for example.
Yeah, and we talked about the issues here in New York, that how far New York in particular could go on that front if they want to actually enable and be more inclusive to women. Especially, so learning from, it looks like we have to learn from Ghent and a couple of those other cities that you mentioned, so it's incredibly interesting.
Non-usual suspects.
Yeah, not the usual suspects, so I really want to get the list from you on that. Brandy, you put together research for City about how the more cities actually invest in their youth, the more that actually fosters prosperous cities, and along those lines, talk to us a little bit about that.
So when we think about prosperous cities, we have to think about, I think, three things. Mm-hmm. One is we think about innovation through technology. We think about building the infrastructure that enables the things that we want to do. But I think the third leg of that stool is thinking about people and talent and how we invest in them. Right. I think when you have that equation together, it's really the formula for success. So why prioritize young people? Well, in our research, what we saw is that the cities who get it right for their young people are actually the places that businesses want to locate. It's pretty clear why, because they need the next generation of workers. But it's also the place where people want to live, because there's a sense of optimism and enthusiasm and an energy that exists. But I also think when we think about inclusion, youth are a key piece of the solution. Right. Because if we don't invest in our youth, we're really setting ourselves up to further the levels of inequality that we see in our cities. Research came out this week that talked about how young people, workers, 25 to 35, that is actually the years where your earning power increases the most, and that your earning levels begin to level out once you hit 35. Now, for some of us, that's really...
What? I just turned 36.
Yeah, I know. It's like for some of us, that's bad news. But, so if you think about what cities need to do then to keep investing in their future, they've really got to set their young people up. Right. So when they're in that earning period of 25 to 35, they are ready to maximize those opportunities.
Am I correct in saying that you're putting in $100 million to fix this? So what are you more specifically doing?
So yes, we are investing $100 million, but I actually think that the money this is a small drop in the bucket.
Yeah.
What we're doing is there are many programs that are out there that are trying to help young people develop the specific skills they need for specific sectors. One of the things that we're grappling with is the changing nature of work.
Yes.
The way we work is so different. And the other piece of it is the changing nature of how we find work. And so our initiative is really focused on helping to empower young people to have the confidence and the connections that they're going to need to navigate a changing 21st century workforce.
So what are you seeing with your work across the world when it comes to the changing nature of work, especially in cities?
Well, particularly in smaller cities, I think with deindustrialization, you're seeing a lot of the need for rapid retraining. There was a wonderful story recently, I forget the city in America, but an old coal city that is turning to tourism and playing on country music strengths to try and instigate a different industry.
Coal city? Where, in America?
Yeah.
We're very focused on coal miners here right now.
Yeah,
so.
exactly. I forget the name, but there are lots of innovations like that. Obviously, all the move to green jobs is a big theme everywhere. Just on inclusion, because I think it's hard to discuss this without mentioning refugees and migrants. And also on smaller cities, because we often talk about bigger cities and focus on the mega cities. There's some really interesting research coming out of Britain, which is where Apolitical is based, on Brexit. And while it was impossible to correlate Brexit voters with places that had more migrants, it was possible to draw a correlation once you looked at the delta in the increase in migrants. So those areas that had seen a very rapid recent increase and that were under pressure because people were competing for new jobs in the workforce that needed training were more likely to vote for Brexit. So inclusion, the speed at which cities can include people, and particularly smaller cities, is so important to deal with populism.
And I would just add something really interesting. I'm glad you brought up the issue of refugees, because we certainly see this placing a lot of stress on cities. But I think we need to change the conversation that this is actually an opportunity, right? You have extremely motivated new residents that are, yes, fleeing a bad situation, but actually many are educated, have skills, and have a desire to move up the ladder. The flip side of that, though, here in the US, is that while we are not necessarily grappling with the same stress of a refugee population as we see in Europe, we have marginalized populations that are placing stresses in our community that have many similarities. And just one I would bring up is the issue that cities are grappling with people re-entering cities after being incarcerated.
Right, and also rural communities being included in cities. I mean, cities have an interesting PR issue right now. The federal government is, at least in the United States, is sort of at war with sanctuary cities at least. And so how do you change the narrative there around what's working, what's successful? There's a lot of sort of resentment against the cities. You saw that particularly in the election. And
I think, Robin definitely, brought up the issue of how the political winds have shifted, and that the ability to influence the election here in the United States was driven by people not living in the major metropolitan cities, which is a huge shift for us. I think the way we approach our work is that we typically, historically, have thought about these issues in silos. What do we do? Do we have an urban development strategy? Do we have a rural development strategy? Technology is changing that distinction. We are so connected in ways we could never imagine. And people move to cities looking for opportunities. And so if we don't address the challenges in rural areas and recognize the connection and the synergies between the two, we're going to continue to just be, I describe it as running on a treadmill, staying in place.
So then who are you, let's get down to sort of a more specific level here. With your funding and obviously your technology platform, I'll start with you, Randy. Who are you investing in? You talked about lifting up mayors, but are you going to entrepreneurs? How are you actually pushing forward these changes?
So typically, I lead a philanthropic foundation, and typically philanthropy, certainly here in the US, has predominantly invested in community-based organizations to, I think, really alleviate the symptoms of poverty, to be there to provide a safety net for households and communities. What we need to do more of is to say that is incredibly important, but we're trying to also simultaneously invest in creating more change agents who are working towards addressing the root causes of poverty. And who are those change agents? For us, we are focused on two target populations: mayors. We think that they have an ability to work quickly, they have resources, and they're close to the people. And then also really innovative nonprofit organizations. And we're not funding them to deliver specific services, but we're working to invest in their ability to think beyond what they need to do day to day and be both advocates for the people they're trying to serve and have the flexible dollars to be able to test ideas quickly.
Great. Are you seeing that happen internationally?
In terms of mayors and...
Yeah, I mean, are you seeing major philanthropic organizations actually doing what the City Foundation is doing?
I mean, one of the themes we hear again and again from philanthropic organizations is the desire now to work more closely with government to get to scale, because so often philanthropy de-risks innovations that government is too scared to take on because the narrative is so punitive if you fail in government. That there's so much scope to bring those two sectors together, to have philanthropy start and government continue and scale.
I mean, it's pretty interesting that we think about it in the private sector, that the firms that are the most successful have built into their DNA an appetite to try things and to fail fast. We have exactly the opposite appetite in the philanthropic sector. We don't want to fail fast. We want to fund these programs over long periods of time and evaluate them for even longer than they were actually in place on the ground. And I think we need to bring some of that entrepreneurial thinking into the social solutions sector.
So let's sort of talk a little bit about the Darwinism that maybe be created out of populism, and whether or not there's, there's something helpful in the fact that because a lot of funding is getting cut, that there'll be a lot of innovation that has been fostered by necessity. So, do you think that's going to happen? And
well, I would say what's really interesting is there have been efforts over the past 5 years in particular that focus on this idea of collective impact, of organizations working together towards a common goal. I think that the scarcity of resources and the need to really fight is driving a sense of uniting in a way and collaboration and raising up and amplifying one common voice in a way that we desperately need. We sound like a Tower of Babel when we're thinking about these issues and advocating. We think it's water, we think it's housing, we think it's education.
Right.
It's really, we need to come together. So I think that's being prompted. And then the second piece is, I think there will be a shakeout in the industry because there are organizations that are basically dependent on contracts from local governments in order to continue to deliver services. Local governments, if they want to see those services delivered, need to see this as something that they've got to work on and figure out how to keep those going.
Yeah. I think when we talked, Robin, we talked a little bit about the zero-sum game that used to exist when there was too much funding. Or I should never say too much funding, excuse me, but without the scarcity of funding. So talk a little bit about that. Yeah,
well, I think a lot of the structures in government are legacy structures of a time when issues were dealt with in the silos that you mentioned. And one of the positive effects of the constraints around budgets and government employees being told to do more with less is this forcing of collaboration, of seeing I mean, we talked about criminal justice, so much of tackling that, and it's an area I've worked a lot in Africa, is making it a future of jobs issue, making it a health issue, looking at mental health, and that's being forced by budgets being cut.
Yeah.
And also I think by, talent is something we were talking about earlier as well. You've got millennials coming into positions of power in government, and they're like, it is crazy things are done like this. People don't talk to each other, they don't share using technology. And that I think is shifting things as well. And also problems are becoming more global. So there's ever more reason to look elsewhere.
You know, and I would say there are countries, for example, India has passed a law that requires all companies doing business in India that are headquartered there must provide 2% of their pre-tax profits for charitable purposes, and there's a predefined set of issue areas. And so we always say in the nonprofit field, the real gap is money. And so the other piece of this,
The real value
the
is
real
money.
gap, the
real gap,
the real
okay.
challenge is there's just not enough money to do what we want to do. And so
Right.
while I do think scarcity will foster innovation, I think we also need to change this dialogue about that it's a resource gap. There's also,
Right.
we have to have a mindset shift and shift how we do business as well.
Right. Okay, well, on that note, we talked about some examples of very poor cities that have done amazing things that can teach rich cities something. So, Robin, do you have some ones you can share?
This is one of my favorite themes in apolitical, particularly because I grew up in a pretty poor place in Botswana. But I think we're starting to see in government what we've seen in the private sector with things like mobile phones, and how in Kenya they've leapfrogged a lot of wealthy countries. And you're seeing that in city and country innovation, but particularly cities. In Lima, for example, the city is working with parents to map out how social services are used and redesign them accordingly. In Gujarat, in India, there's a program called Rent a Roof, which is basically allocating more space for solar panels, which is often one of the barriers to having them in cities. And they've done some really clever stuff around that. They couldn't get private sector investment because there was a skepticism as to whether there was enough roof space. So they worked with the IFC on using satellites to prove that there was indeed roof space. So lots of cool examples like these.
Yeah. I mean, have you seen that in any American cities? That's super interesting.
Yeah, we have a program we call the City Accelerator, where we actually work with a partner, Living Cities, and bring together the chiefs of staff, who I actually think are the real secret source to getting things done in cities. We bring together the chiefs of staff from around the country to talk about what challenges they're facing, and then we let them put forward ideas and basically provide the cities directly, almost like venture capital, to test some of these ideas quickly. And so we've had cities here in the US working on, we've had Boston and Philadelphia and Albuquerque working on how do you embed innovation into your city and institutionalize it. We have a cohort working on citizen engagement. Here's an idea. You want to build a city that's livable and meets the needs of your residents. Let's actually talk to them. And how do we use technology to foster that? We have a cohort of cities working on infrastructure. Just one example I'll give, City of Pittsburgh. You know, it's not a city we typically call out as an example. There are 700 public stairways in the city of Pittsburgh. If you've ever been there, it's a city that has really built along a riverbed. The stairways are crumbling. You know who can't get to work? You know who's inconvenienced by that? It's the low-income residents in that community. And so you see cities really seeing that if they invest in infrastructure in a way that can both create a social benefit as well as a municipal and economic benefit.
Yeah.
Just one example close to home here. We heard a story about how the Bronx is learning from Kampala in Uganda around providing food to really poor areas that don't have access to it.
Oh, so the food deserts.
No, I don't know if it's so much desert, but just food poverty areas and how to serve them.
I mean, I think the thing that we see, and I think that's a shared experience here, is that cities want to learn from each other, but they're also really competitive.
Yeah.
So that's also the other piece. It's sort of like, how do you incent cities to want to do things differently? Well, each city wants to be the best and be doing something that's.
Do you think that comes out of the mayor's CEO philosophy, and especially with Bloomberg did a pretty good job of setting that up? So.
I'm sure. And yesterday, the mayor of Vancouver was talking about the Vancouver's greenest city by 2020 goal, and how that had been really interesting. He said it had been a tool for citizen engagement because the aspirational nature of the goal had really rallied the whole citizenry around this competition.
Yeah, it's a very interesting dynamic that you don't see obviously on the national.
Right.
level. And
You
why
don't
you,
see,
yeah,
you don't see senators vying
No, you
to be
don't.
the first in anything, right? You don't see Congress
I don't even want to talk about those people right now. But yes,
Although I think you see it in smaller countries.
need a weekend to detox.
In European countries, for example, the Dutch are so proud of how inclusive they are as a country. New Zealand, where I've lived for, but is very proud of itself because it's small and on the other side of the world.
Yeah, so it's really interesting at what entrepreneurs can actually learn from cities. And I know your platform actually enables that, but if either of you have some examples, I think you were talking a little bit about Australia and it's, how it's working on women's empowerment, and that's being cycled back to the entrepreneurial community, so.
Well, yeah, for sure. I mean, I think there are lots of, we're really interested in this idea of, we always hear about the private sector teaching government how to do things, but we think there's a lot of scope for government to learn from the private sector. And we've done some research on characteristics that make government employees successful. And interestingly, one of them that comes out across different countries, different levels of government is grit. The people working in government are so gritty and so persistent.
Grit.
So that's a big one. But in general, there's just a ton of sharing. And I think cities are worried everywhere about how they make it easier for entrepreneurs. So the competitive dynamic around tech hubs and so forth.
Yeah,
is
no, it's
strongest.
amazing in New York. I mean, obviously I'm co-founder of a fast-growing startup, and the support that has changed in the last 4 years since we started the company is very interesting. I mean, a lot of it comes in partnership with the private sector as well, but yeah.
I think that we've always talked about the term public-private partnerships. This isn't a new concept, but I believe that the expectation that consumers, customers, clients, stakeholders have that the private sector is going to really stand up in an authentic way and not look at this as their philanthropy, but figure out how to leverage their core business activities to add positive impact to society. I think this is a game-changing moment of our generation. And I think we're going to begin to see our private sectors, the CEOs who are the most admired, and the companies that are most admired, and the companies that are going to be around for the next 100 years are those that are actively engaged in this issue.
Yeah.
And government really cares about this. Our platform, which we sometimes describe as a bit like being TripAdvisor meets LinkedIn for policy and government, is built around big issues that are being faced by government around the world. And we did, when we started designing it, we did a global survey. What are the and ask government what are the big things they're facing where they want to learn from others. And things like future of jobs came up, big data, but the top most requested issue was how to do better public-private partnerships with philanthropy and with the private sector.
Right.
Since you brought up the issue of entrepreneurship, there is one thing I do want to share about the research that we commissioned, which was really interesting. In our research, 70% of young people said that they would like to become entrepreneurs. Only 7% in the 35 global cities we surveyed, we did a survey of 7,000 young people, are actually pursuing entrepreneurship. The other piece of data, though, is that 75% of the young people felt that apprenticeships and internships in private sector companies were for them the most critical tool that they could have to get ahead. So what is that telling us? That actually young people realize that the world of work is changing, that the way we live in cities is changing, and that you may actually move in and out of being an entrepreneur, of working for a small business, working for a large multinational company.
Yeah, it's very interesting, the internship, apprenticeship. I'm dealing with that with our company right now. I think the big key there is how do you fund that for startups that can't necessarily afford those programs? Because if you have just school credit, for example, that really really separates the kids who can afford to have the internships versus the kids who can't. So that's what at least I saw growing up before this was a real conversation. So it's very interesting.
Just one great city innovation on entrepreneurship. LA created the position of an entrepreneur in residence in the city to make the city government more empathetic to the needs of entrepreneurs, which is such a brilliant idea.
Oh, that's interesting. They have an EIR.
Yeah.
I wonder if we have that. I don't think we have that in New York. We have chief digital officer, which is relatively new, which Rachel used to be, but Great. Well, we have 30 seconds left, so I think my last quick question is, name one city that you think we should all be looking at right now.
I think Medellin in Colombia, very violent city, doing some of the best innovation in the world right now, the city
Great.
level.
Robin, do you have one? I'm sorry, Brandy.
I think I like Baltimore, and I'll tell you, because they have anchor institutions that they're building off of to say, we're not just going to attract jobs, we're going to use the anchor educational institutions we have here to create jobs and create jobs for the people here. We're going to invest in transportation infrastructure to make it easier for people to get to those jobs. And by the way, we're going to be very intentional about providing extra supports to the most vulnerable populations here to ensure that they benefit from this development.
Great. All right, thank you, everybody.
And now, please welcome co-chairman, U.S. News and World Report, and co-publisher, New York Daily News, Eric Gertler.
Great, welcome everybody. We're going to jump right into this panel. Given the limited time, we've got 35 minutes to explore municipal collaborations and how those types of collaborations are transforming cities. I want to thank Jerry Halton for inviting me here and doing a wonderful job with the weather here. So, but now to get to work. So, just to give you a sense, I'm going to introduce the panelists. We're going to organize this panel around Brooklyn rules, which means that the panelists are going to keep their answers short. It's Brooklyn, so I get to cut off the panelists if they go on too long. And we're going to try and turn this into a conversation. So in terms of the introductions, we're going to keep them very short. You have them in your booklets. Very pleased to have on the panel Miguel Gamiño, who has come here and is the Chief Technology Officer for the City of New York under Mayor Blasio. And prior to that, he served as the Chief Information Officer of a small town on the West Coast. I think it's called San Francisco, but welcome to New York. Also very pleased to have Samir Saini here, who is the Chief Information Officer from the City of Atlanta, who will also give us a sense not just of his role in government, but also combining that with his distinguished career in the private sector. We're also going down the line, very pleased to have Her Excellency, Dr. Bishr, who's the Director General of Smart Dubai, and can give us an international perspective of how things are working in municipalities overseas. And then lastly, Brenna Berman, who's the Executive Director of City Digital, and who until March of this year was the CIO for the City of Chicago, and now is working through City Digital, thinking about technology acceleration and a citywide strategy. So to start, and I'm going to go down the panel and ask each of them the same question. And we're going to start with Miguel, because he's from New York after all. And the question for you is, you're new in your job here in New York City. How do you think about your job here? And also, and I'm going to ask this to all of you, how do you think about the collaborations here in the city to help you accelerate the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so thanks for having us. This is a great opportunity to talk about not just what's happening in cities, but among cities that I think is really important. And so in New York, we're faced with some pretty sizable challenges. Mayor de Blasio has, among many other things, committed to broadband for all New Yorkers by 2025. And that's one of the things that I was brought here to deliver. And that's only going to be possible, frankly, through collaboration within the city among agencies, right? And so we're thinking about how we accomplish that in our own ecosystem. But one of the things that I pretty consistently find very, very valuable is interactions with colleagues like those that are seated with me today and the rest of the council that we've formed, because it gives us an opportunity to talk about our challenges, learn from the experiences that they have in their cities, and contribute maybe to the thinking that is happening in other parts of the world.
And before we move on, can you just talk a little bit on the types of collaborations you would need with the private sector in addition to the agencies that you would work with on something like broadband?
Yeah, I mean, you know, something as significant as broadband for all New Yorkers, 8.5 million people or so, can't be done on our own. Yesterday, when I delivered the keynote, or day before yesterday when I delivered the keynote, one of the things I highlighted was the public-private partnership with the private sector that helped us deliver Link NYC, right, and our Department of Information Technology and Telecommunications. Without those sorts of partnerships and joint effort, it's both resources like money and infrastructure, but it's also intellectual talent, frankly, that all has to come together to deliver something as big and significant as broadband for all New Yorkers.
Right. Samir, so give us a sense of how you view your role in Atlanta, and you know, in the same way that broadband is a major focus in New York City, what is the major focus in Atlanta, and what are the types of collaborations that you need to enter into to make that possible?
Sure. So, well, in terms of my role, of course, oversee all the information technology services for all the departments of the city. All of our cities are different in terms of what we do. So for the city of Atlanta, we oversee the public safety technology strategy, the judiciary arm as well, Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, our water utility as well, and then of course the operations departments. So on the topic of collaboration, a little story I want to share. So 2 months ago, our council of CIOs had a convening in Chicago where no vendors were allowed. And it was just us swapping stories on, you know, what challenges are we facing, how can we collaborate on enterprise data platform architecture, for example. And that night, we were having dinner, and I got a text message from someone in Atlanta with a picture of smoke burrowing up along a major interstate in our city. And that turned out to be, that escalated, and turned out that a 100-foot segment of a major interstate within Atlanta collapsed. Not something that happens very often, and actually a major issue for our city, because there's really 2 interstates that drive all of the commuting traffic in the region. Long story short, in this now time of crisis, all of my CIO friends huddled over and said, what can we do? How can we help? When I went back to Atlanta, follow-up calls with Aisha, City of Boston CIO, on how he's using Waze data you know, during similar crises they've had in Boston to understand hazards, right, and what's happening, situational awareness on our corridors. What it meant to me was sort of the real value, right, of having a group of CIOs, right, to talk to help, especially in a time of crisis. Right.
So I think that's a great topic, which we'll come back to and talk about what you're learning from each other on cities. I also assume that when you saw this 100 feet of infrastructure sort of disappearing, that you went back to the bar and had another drink, but that's a story for later. So, Dr. Bishr, give us your sense as well in Dubai. How do you view your role? How are things changing? And what is the major focus of what you're working on? And in Dubai, is there an interaction with the private sector? Are these types of collaborations that are occurring?
Absolutely. Actually, seeing the weather like this in New York, transferring from yesterday, a very sunny day, to a very rainy day, this is our role as a smart city offices, that we need to design properly the experience we wanted to happen in our city. And this is our role in Smart Dubai office, designing a pleasant, happier experience in our city by utilizing innovative technologies. When it's come to collaboration, there isn't any single organization or entity can have the magic to transform a whole city to a smart city, especially when you have different verticals, different dimensions of a city, from economic to health to education. You need to have a body to orchestrate all this collaboration that's happened in the city, whether it be from a governmental perspective or also bringing the private and individuals, academia, to share the same vision and to design a proper experience. And this is my role back home in Smart Dubai office, to orchestrate a happier experience in our city. And when it's come to private sector, we've recently launched a PPP model that both government and private sector share the risk when it's come to implement the nascent technologies, especially that these are very new technologies, and the government is still not yet ready for investment in such kind of infrastructure. Here, where we want also the private sector to come on board, to share the risk with the government, and then monetize the product that will come out from such kind of implementation. When we've implemented our digital backbone in Dubai, we've entered in such kind of partnership with a local telco company that work as a master system integrator, bringing a consortium of different technologies from Internet of Things platform until data orchestration layer, all the way through a dashboarding tools.
Great, great. And then last, but certainly not least, Brenna, so you've taken on a new role.
Yeah.
And why, and why don't we start with the what? What is different now that you are looking at a citywide strategy from, in a sense, from a technology accelerator, from being the CIO? What does that help you do? Does that make it easier in terms of collaboration? And then to have the panel ready, we're going to start talking about how cities are learning from each other in this area. So.
Well, certainly one of the things that's easier is I'm not worried about the operation of our data center anymore. So my role at the city when I was CIO up until the end of March was very similar to Samir's, in that I was responsible for all the operational technology for all of our departments, as well as the innovation partnerships to bring smart cities to bear for city government. And over time, because we've been pursuing that strategy in Chicago for over 6 years, it became clear that the focus of advanced technologies on city government was really, for us in Chicago, one small slice of the city. Right. And we wanted to expand that vision. And we're very lucky in Chicago, from our perspective, to have an embarrassment of riches with universities and very committed community groups, very strong hospital systems that should all be at the table defining what the future of Chicago looks like and how to empower that by leveraging these advanced technologies. I have to apologize for how awful I sound. I've had so many great conversations in the last 2 days that my voice has just gone on strike. So to do that, to really bring all of those organizations to the table for what we're viewing as like the next phase of smart cities in Chicago, and to really make sure actually that the resident is at the center of those discussions of how we're defining that strategy, of how we're co-designing those solutions. The resident needs to be that co-designer. And to do that, we really felt like that leadership needed to come from outside of government. Right. Government is a player. I'm not saying that city government's in the backseat, but it's just one player. And so I moved over at the mayor's request to UI Labs and the program we call City Digital, which gives me the freedom to create some really more innovative partnerships than I could do in city government with some of the restrictions we have. And also to actually have other cities in the mix as well. In our last workshop about mobility, actually Samir was there so that we could have another perspective from another city, which was interesting, because luckily, while we have a lot of challenges in Chicago, we don't have every single one.
So in a sense, what you're talking about is this more holistic view about how technology and partnerships are helping an entire city as opposed to a slice just in government, and
right.
The idea about how does a resident, how does a worker how do their lives get enhanced by technology in these collaborations? So.
Yep. And one quick example, we're looking right now really specifically at a couple of aspects of energy efficiency that has to do with how the utilities are working with their customers, and the city's actually not a participant in that. And so sometimes the right answers may not involve city government.
Right.
And you need to have that freedom to do that.
So let's go into and talk about, you've created a CIO council, you're learning from each other, all of you. Samir, you talked about an example. So let's sort of learn what you're learning from other cities, but first, it's too easy, Miguel, I have to ask you. What did you learn in San Francisco? What are you seeing in New York? Is there anything possibly you could have taken from San Francisco, or is New York just a different place?
New York is definitely a different place. I think what I've found is that New York is particularly good at not just looking at technology for technology's sake, but for the positive outcomes that it can produce for the community. And I think lots of other cities are similar, but that's what's really kind of hit home for me as I've kind of learned more about the ecosystem and met a lot of people, is that everyone sees technology as an opportunity, but it's an opportunity to deliver better outcomes for everyday people in real life situations, and not just about technology for technology's sake. And that's been really, really energizing, frankly, for me. That makes all this work feel much more meaningful.
So Samir, the story that you told is a great way where you can share, and certainly in crisis situations, get real-time responses. But is there an area within your purview of technology that you have found particularly helpful in sharing information with other cities? Is it on dealing with vendor relationships? Is it thinking about partnership? Is it thinking about goals? How do you think about the collaboration that you're getting from others in other cities?
Sure. I mean, talk all day, but there's so many. So let's take cyber, right?
Take what?
Cybersecurity. So from a smart cities perspective, it's a hot topic, very relevant nowadays. Suddenly, we enter a world where we have connected traffic lights, street lights, critical infrastructure. They're now vulnerable, right, to cyber attack, and what are we doing? So there's been a few cyber threats to critical infrastructure for some cities that you may be reading in the paper. And without calling out those cities, I can assure you we all have conversations with them right after, say, what happened? How did you respond? And how can we learn, all of us can learn from that event to prevent that from happening to our cities. So that's one area. I think the other is IoT, Internet of Things, and how each of our cities are testing and deploying various IoT devices, and how we're ingesting that data and utilizing that data to really move outcomes for our cities. A good example is Brenna and the work that she's doing with Argonne Labs and the Array of Things, sensor array that's, see, hear, and smell, and that's being deployed at scale across Chicago and across the board. So we're learning from her as we do our version of the Array of Things, which includes a sensor array that's being built by Georgia Tech, our institution. So this some examples.
And Dr. Bishr, is it helpful for you to see what's going on in cities around the world? Is in that what is going on, is it applicable to you, not from a theoretical standpoint, but from a practical standpoint? Are there things that you can actually implement?
Yes, actually, the purpose behind being part of this council is to learn. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. We want to start wherever others stop. And seeing it from an implementation perspective, more practical perspective, that's how different cities learn from each other. Whether it be from a standard, whether it be from vendor selection, lessons learned, and that's what the purpose of the council is. But yet also in Dubai, we tap into different platforms because what you do here in the state is something, and what the rest of the world are doing is a different thing. The challenges here are different. Here, dealing with legacy solutions is a way to learn also. But when you see other cities, global cities like in Asia or Europe, you'll see there are different also challenges they are facing. How to integrate government with the private sector in the same platform. So for us, it is very important to listen, to learn from others, especially what my colleagues here are doing, and bringing together a proper standards, whether it be the Internet of Things or the incubators and the accelerators. And these are the things that we want to learn also from in Dubai.
That's an interesting thing. I want to come back to standards, if there are set standards among all the cities. But first, Brenna, I'm gonna put you on the spot just a little bit.
Sure.
And ask you specifically, can you tell us a specific case study where you've learned something from another city, and then and tell us, you know, who the city was.
Yes.
And then I'm going to come back and also ask you and put you all on the spot and saying, who's doing it best in other cities? You know, outside of your city, who do you turn to? So what have you learned?
Actually, it's a good question because it's, I mean, I actually take things from.
By the way, the answer is always New York, but we'll get to it later.
Yeah, no, and actually, New York is on my list, and it's funny because the way cities roll things out and focus on different projects is unique because we are responding to different initiatives and priorities depending on what our mayor is focused on or what our communities are highlighting at that point in time. But the underlying challenges or levers are the same. So privacy is actually something every community, every city is dealing with. And the way that it will be implemented is actually very culturally specific to every city. So when we were deploying the array of things, which is, and sensors in general are collecting data in the public way. So privacy is a component of sensors in every city. So every city is dealing with privacy. And the privacy policy for every city is going to be different. And when we reached the point of needing to write our privacy policy, the city of Seattle had written theirs literally, I think, 2 or 3 months before. Yeah. And Seattle is a member of the council. Their CIO is an extraordinarily collaborative and generous individual with his time. And we took not only the work they had done, but also the process they had used to create it. Now, our policy is quite different from Seattle's because our community is different. Yep. We also looked at the work New York had done around Link NYC. And again, the help there wasn't necessarily the policy that had come out of it because Chicago is different from New York. But the process was very helpful. And I know Boston is looking at the work that we did, and we'll learn from that. We also talked to Singapore. We talked to Sydney, Australia. And so I look at different cities for different things. Right. When you look at ubiquitous access, no one does it like Seoul. So we all are actually, we have different strengths. We're all at different points of our development, and that's actually why the council is so important. Right. Because the things that Chicago might be doing very well are different than the things that Dubai is ahead at, is different than the things that Atlanta is, different again than the things that New York is. And then how we implement them will be different because of our culture.
That's very helpful. So, Samir, from your perspective, a number of different areas have now been raised that are areas in which you can learn from other cities. We've talked about standards, access, RFPs, privacy. Which of those have you taken a lesson from, and there may be something else, from another city, and which city was that really helped you?
Sure. So, I've been doing a lot more taking than giving, which I guess is the point. I'll give an example. So one thing I shared in the panel 2 days ago is our North Avenue Smart Corridor demonstration, which is our living lab, an example of how we can prove the value of deploying a wide array of different kinds of IoT devices and to understand challenges on this corridor and be able to move the needle on improving mobility and public safety, et cetera. One example is citizen kiosks. Kiosks, right, are one of the more popular IoT connected infrastructure items that most cities have deployed or are planning to deploy, including us. Link NYC was obviously one of the most successful kiosk deployments, I think, in the country. So that was before Miguel took on the role. I was actively engaged in understanding what this kiosk is, how does it function, what's the use cases that create value, and now we're actually issuing an RFP for a citizen kiosk in 2 weeks. And then we'll be deploying it on North Avenue and other corridors in our city. And it's a perfect example of someone that's did it well. Let's steal those ideas. Let's bake that into the RFI, the RFP, and then let's deploy.
Well, we do say stealing is the highest form of flattery, so we get that.
So thanks, Miguel. Yeah.
So, Miguel, from your perspective, you've had the benefit, obviously, of having this role in 2 different cities. When you moved to New York and you were facing a whole new set of problems, what cities did you turn to on the issues that you're doing, and what's a case study that has helped you so far, either in terms of learning or in terms of a project that you're looking to implement here in the city?
So I'm gonna take the question and answer maybe a different question. I think that the power of, I am a huge fan of each one of these folks sitting next to me, and the rest of the members of our group.
Yeah, we lost.
Hello? Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? So I'm a huge fan of them and their work. I don't know if
There you go.
All right. Back up. So what I was saying was I'm a huge fan of theirs. Each one of them is doing extraordinary work in different areas, as has been discussed. And if you think about the power of the fact that I have their direct access in my cell phone, for example, and I could pick up the phone and call Samir and say, hey, I read this thing about some work you're doing, and I want to know more. And that cuts through any filter, right? I can go straight to Samir and say, tell me what you experienced, tell me what you would have done differently, tell me what you would do if you were starting over, or if you were me trying to do something similar. Same thing with Dr. Bishr and Brenna and everyone else in our group. I mean, it's just, if you think about the power of that collaboration, and you think about, just for a moment, the list of cities that are included in what is just the very beginning of this council, of this collaboration, it's tremendously powerful. And I've said over and over again, and I'm not shy about repeating it, that the superpower of the public sector is the ability to collaborate. The private sector doesn't have that luxury a lot of times. Coca-Cola won't pick up the phone and call the Samir at Pepsi and say, hey, I read that you did this really cool thing. Can you share the source code with me? That's just not going to happen. But among us, we can. And so I think it's one thing that we can use to really accelerate the progress that's happening in each of our cities. I mean, the happiness approach in Dubai, when I first visited Dubai, because I was invited to speak at a conference there, I learned so much from that trip. And one of the greatest takeaways was their very focused, simple approach to measuring happiness, and that's what mattered. And it was just the brilliance and the simplicity I took back to San Francisco at the time and carry forward with me here, and all the stuff that's happening in Chicago. So every single one of these cities is doing tremendous work in different ways, and the ability for each of us to pick up our phone and call one another directly. This isn't send an email and wait for some response. We can pick up the phone and engage directly, and that accelerates all of that progress. Right. Super powerful.
The Pepsi Coke analogy is actually a good one, because Pepsi's in New York and Coke is in Atlanta. And they definitely don't talk. But we do.
So let's, as we get to the last number of minutes in the panel, let's look forward. And I'm going to start with you, Dr. Bishr. That you are seeing everything that's going on in all these other cities. If you project 5 or 10 years forward based on something you're seeing in another city, what will be the single biggest change in life in Dubai because of technology, because of what you're learning from places around the world that you want to see implemented in Dubai?
Yeah, actually, when I talk about Dubai, maybe it is different than the issues that other US cities are facing. We have a very demanding leadership that want the future to happen today, that we need to accelerate our implementation 10 times faster. So our goal today is to bring the future to be implemented today. We have already, like we've launched the 2021 strategy, but also we have the 2050, the 2071, which is the sentimental anniversary of our nation. So we have this very clear vision. But in the near future, 2021, because of all what we've learned around us, we were benchmarked not only with cities, because we see our city as an open lab, as an entrepreneurial city. So we start also to bench ourselves with other organizations like Facebook, Google, Amazon, what they are doing internally, how they are driving efficiency. And this is what we want to see in our city. We want to see an efficient, seamless, safe, and happier, rich experience. Today we've launched the blockchain strategy, and our goal is by 2021 to celebrate the last governmental paper transaction, wherein we will have a full digitized city by 2021 with a paperless, cashless transactions. These are the things that we've learned from private sector, but also hearing and seeing what other city attempt to do, not necessarily in a holistic perspective, but in a vertical specific project. But what we want to do in Dubai is to scale it across the city.
Right, great. And in a sense, the same question to you, Brennan. If you go forward 10, 15 years from what you've seen around the world, and you did mention something about, ubiquity of access, but what do you see as you think about your citywide strategy of focusing on the resident, focusing on the worker? What will be the single biggest change in Chicago? And will that be a result of the technology you're doing, or will that be from the creativity of entrepreneurs in Chicago?
So all of those are supports of making sure that every child in Chicago, no matter what neighborhood they're born in, has the same chance of achieving their goals, whatever they might be. And that goes back to environmental equality, educational equality, health equality. And right now, the things that are preventing that even playing field are inequalities in our mobility systems, inequality in our educational systems, and technology and in entrepreneurship has a role to play in evening that out. So there's a lot of incremental steps in there to create a resiliency in the city of Chicago that means no matter what hospital and what neighborhood you're born in 5 years from now, that doesn't determine where you are when you're 25 years old. And right now, there's too much determination in where you're born in Chicago.
So the key focus of technology in Chicago is to ensure there's a level playing field throughout all areas.
Yep.
Environmental, health, education, and so on.
Yes.
You want to jump in?
Yeah, so I want to, before we run out of time, I want to make my shameless plug.
Yes.
The council was started mostly because of what you've heard today, which is that regardless of the hemisphere or the language we speak, we're all struggling with the same challenges, trying to accomplish the same goals. And that's what struck me and several colleagues several years ago in Barcelona, and that was what birthed this whole concept. And it can't be said often enough how important, how powerful that is to moving the world forward. And the things that we're doing, the technological challenges we're facing, they literally transcend types of governments, types of communities. They have to be adapted to those kind of nuances, but the core premise is almost always the same or very, very similar. And then I have to say this because we have Brenna with us. She's the founder of our alumni, because she has moved on, as many of us will. That's just the nature of this job, I think, too. And so I think there's also an unintended power in this organization to also keep that continuity of relationship. So the person who is coming in to lead Chicago behind her is automatically plugged into our network, is accepted and welcomed into our group as though she had been there from the jump. And I hope that will be valuable to her. And I'm really looking forward to one day, to joining Brenna on the Alumni Association and watching other people come in behind us and continue to accomplish really amazing things, hopefully inspired by this collaborative effort that we've created with this council.
Although you better watch out, because alumni of colleges get hit up for donations. So you guys, you better be careful.
We haven't told Brenna about that yet.
So very quickly, in the last minute and a half, in a sentence or two, CIO Council, in some biggest benefit that you get out of it, just to summarize the panel. Brenna, why don't we just go right down?
I think the biggest benefit is, one, the group as a resource of individuals working on the same problems, but also the opportunity we have in the coming year for joint development.
Great. Dr. Bishr?
Sharing knowledge and best practices in a common platform, common language between us.
Right. Samir?
Free therapy.
You stole it. That's what I was going to add, was that there's also, we live a certain unique life in this role, and sometimes it involves drinks and sometimes it doesn't, but it always involves group support and group therapy for sure, as we face sometimes falling bridges or other challenges. Right. It's been very powerful to watch the group rally together.
So let me say, as someone who has served in government as well, appreciate all the work you're doing. You've got really tough challenges ahead of you, particularly in something where it's always changing. People expect so much. So thank you for all you do, and let's give them a round of applause, everybody. So thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Enjoy lunch. We resume in here promptly at 12:45. See you then.
Thank you.